The Stone Zone with legendary Republican strategist and political icon and pundit Roger Stone. Stone has served as a senior campaign aide to 3 Republican presidents. He is a New York Times best-selling author and a longtime friend and advisor of President Donald Trump. As an outspoken libertarian, Stone has appeared on thousands of broadcasts, spoken at countless venues, and lectured before the prestigious Oxford Political Union and the Cambridge Union Society. Due to his 4+ decades in the political and cultural arena, Stone has become a pop culture icon. And now, here's your host, Roger Stone.
Welcome to the Stone Zone with Roger Stone. I am not Roger Stone. I am filling in for Roger today. My name is Mark Vargas, and I am editor-in-chief of Illinois Review. And we have breaking news. The Department of Justice today has released a letter written by the would-be assassin in Palm Beach at the President Trump's golf club, where he says, "I failed you," in his assassination attempt of President Trump. And he talks about a $150,000 bounty for President Trump for anyone to be able to finish the job. This is absolutely outrageous that the United States Department of Justice, which is controlled by the Biden and Harris regime, that despite the threat assessments being incredibly high on the life of President Donald Trump, who literally took a bullet for democracy back in July in Butler, Pennsylvania, it is inconceivable that the Department of Justice would release this letter that essentially puts a $150,000 bounty on President Trump's head. I can't figure out why they would do such a thing. And you can only imagine that from this point moving forward, these crazed, psychotic individuals will now think that there's a reward for trying to take out President Trump. It is unbelievable. We've never seen this before in American history, where a president or presidential candidate has been targeted as many times as President Trump. In fact, Gerald Ford in 1975 had 2 assassination attempts within weeks apart. But here you've got President Trump, very serious assassination attempts in just a couple of months apart from each other. And unfortunately, because of the rhetoric coming out from the left and the Democrats, where there are literally hundreds of quotes coming from Democrats, including Vice President Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Democratic members of Congress who have consistently said President Trump is a threat to democracy. The MAGA movement, a threat to democracy. And in fact, one member of Congress, Democratic member of Congress, even called for President Trump to be shot. This is un-American. This is outrageous. And as a result of the Democrats' very violent and divisive and dangerous rhetoric, President Trump's life is in grave danger. And now Biden's Justice Department, the Biden and Harris Justice Department, has just released this letter putting a bounty on President Trump's head. We can't forget that just hours after the assassination attempt, the second attempt at President Trump while he was at his Palm Beach County Golf Club, that the Palm Beach County Sheriff, a Democrat, Rick Bradshaw, talked about why security was relaxed around the golf club because Trump is not the sitting president. Let's take a listen to this clip.
How was this able to happen, and for future reference, is there any obscurity of the golf course?
Well, you got to understand the golf course is surrounded by shrubbery. So when somebody gets into the shrubbery, they're pretty much out of sight. All right? And at this level that he is at right now, he's not the sitting president. If he was, we would have had this entire golf course around it. Well, because he's not, the security is limited to the areas that the Secret Service deems possible. So I would imagine that the next time he comes to the golf course, there'll probably be a little bit more people around the perimeter.
He's not the sitting president. And let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, that the Trump International Golf Club there in West Palm Beach, what's across the street? The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. And so I have to beg the question, does anybody look out the window? It is outrageous to make that very lame, poor excuse from a senior law enforcement official within the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, the actual sheriff himself, to say that security was lax because he's not the sitting president. It is outrageous. We'll continue to follow this story. But in another breaking news story, a story just published yesterday in the New York Post, Venezuelan gangs, armed Venezuelan gangs, are taking over the city of Chicago, particularly in the south and west side of Chicago. Why? Because Democratic leaders in Chicago have made it a sanctuary city. And over the last couple of years, under the Biden-Harris open border policies, literally tens of millions of illegals have entered our country without any question. And about 30,000 of those have made a home here in the city of Chicago. And we'd have no idea who they are, what their backgrounds are. There's a reason why there are signs posted outside of prisons and jails warning motorists, do not pick up hitchhikers. Why? Because we don't know their backgrounds. You don't know who they are. Yet, under the Harris and Biden regime, millions, tens of millions of illegals have entered our city, and we're seeing the consequences now. And joining me live is the founder of Ex Felons for Community and Social Change, Tyrone Muhammad, who was featured in yesterday's New York Post story. Tyrone, welcome to the StoneZONE, and thank you for joining me. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, Mark. Thank you, my friend, for having me. Well, I'm doing well, and we've been on a round of tours and a bunch of conversations over the phone regarding public safety of Chicago streets and communities, and just the overall disinvestment in our communities and what's been going on for the last, as I could say, since I've been born, but for the last 3 or 4 years, especially since the arrival of the migrants. I call them the terrorists on our shores and in our communities, and it's very concerning.
Tyrone, I notice your ex-cons for Trump hat, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. But I just wanted to give, I love your shirt there. I just want to give everybody a little bit of context and some background. You are the founder of Ex Felons for Community and Social Change. Please give everyone an idea of the work that you and your team do day in and day out to make the city of Chicago, particularly the streets in the south and west side of Chicago, safer. Tell us a little bit about your organization and your mission.
So, Mark, I served 21 years in prison for murder. And after coming home, just sitting back watching seeing that there was no real reformation in prisons and men coming in and out of prison from Chicago, I said, since we had a hand as men who are in prison, serving our time and transforming our lives and our mindsets and ourselves and our families, we must take a personal responsibility to fix the damage that our own hands have caused. The terroristic effect of violence caused by our hands. Forget about everything else. We're talking about what we've done and taking personal responsibility. We decided to start Ex Felons for Community and Social Change because I wanted it to be a real serious notion and an affront to this so-called what we always talk about as the 13th Amendment and being duly convicted. So Ex Felons for Community and Social Change is an organization founded by formerly incarcerated men who actually have served over 20 years or more to get back into our communities, to perform violence intervention, workforce development, and to mentor at-risk youth, as well as deal with all the returning citizens to put them on a path and a trajectory towards useful citizenship, and to help those coming from prison and those who would be cons to amalgamate back into society properly, as well as to educate young men into eliminating or putting down a life of crime and to actively be involved in their communities. So Ex Felons for Community and Social Change has been on the forefront of a lot of the violence intervention in the cities. And we patrol, we have over probably 15, I call them community response vehicles as well as to transport our children from programs to sports and so forth and so on. Even we have a nice vehicle also, a 15 passenger van that you also had a hand in helping us to acquire, to help some of these at-risk youth get to and fro to programming and do a lot of the behavior modification that we do to these young men to teach them about the value of being a citizen and not picking up guns and drugs to murder their fellow citizens.
Tyrone, I know that a lot of people, and I've been guilty of this before I learned so much about all of this, but you think that these young teenagers, and that's a lot of the crime is being committed by young teenagers, the carjackings, the armed carjacking, the armed robberies. But these young kids, they don't want to live a life full of crime. They don't want to be robbing people and stealing cars. What is sort of the genesis of this that leads these youth, these teens, to be forced to go into a life of crime instead of a life about being a productive member of society? What's the cause, the root cause of these teens committing these acts?
So think about it, Mark. I was a teen myself. I probably carjacked tens of cars. I've shot guns. I've robbed. I did home invasions. I kidnapped drug dealers and did stuff like that. So think about this. I had a scholarship to Spartan School of Aeronautics and I like to fix on turbine engines. So kids don't wake up in Inglewood, Lawndale, Woodlawn, Austin, and Chicago communities thinking they want to get into a life of crime. When you see no doctors, when you see no lawyers, when you see no real productive individual, you see more disinvestment, you see more negative than you see positive. So we're asking these children whose brains are still forming in their head to not imagine themselves being greater than the community that they're in. When schools are failing our children, Chicago public schools are failing our children have the opportunity, a greater chance of going to the prisons in the graveyard than they do in college. The unemployment rate right now for 18 and 24-year-old Black men and boys is over 70% in Chicago. And the chances of a young man acquiring a gun is easier than a young man acquiring a book. It's easier for a young man to get a good gun than a decent book. Is what I'm saying to you is that, for one, understand people that's listening to Mark show and to the StoneZONE. Black men and boys don't produce Smith & Wesson extended clips, 100-round drums, bullets, AKs. We don't produce heroin, cocaine. We don't produce weed in the cities of Chicago. Yet all these products affects our life and affects these young men's life. It's easier for them to acquire drugs than for them to get a job. That's a problem, and that's a problem that this administration has opened the floodgates for. This administration has violated our community. And I would say for 60 years, we have consistently voted the same way over and over and over, only to get the disinvestment and the conditions that you see every day in these communities, with no real hope for changing it, because men who are more than capable of changing it, Mark, they won't use guys like us who've experienced it, who've been through it, who are subject matter experts, only because we don't take on the narrative that they are pushing.
Tyrone, my last question is, and I want to talk about this New York Post article, but I think it really creates the context for this. Democrat Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has been very critical of President Trump, and he's been weaponized by the Harris campaign to constantly attack President Trump. But what sort of, for everyone and on the record, for everyone to hear this directly from you, what sort of support has Governor J.B. Pritzker and his administration given to you and your organization that is out there helping these teens violence prevention efforts. What kind of support have you received from the Democratic governor and the mouthpiece of the Harris campaign?
Absolutely no support. In fact, our efforts, we've probably been in the middle of intervening in 2 to 3 thousand shootings since my organization has been in effect in 7 years. Not only that, we've been able to put over 400 ex-felons to work, and I mentor personally over 80 at-risk youth and former criminals, youth criminals in these communities that now are part of ECCSC that I have a direct relationship to, and for that matter, when the representatives, state reps, and state senators allocate resources and funding to our organization to do the work, to continue to do the great work that we do. Um, the line items and the allocations of funds, they never reach our organization because of my views and my support of Donald Trump and anything dealing with any conservative notions. The Democratic Party here has openly violated ex-cons for community and social change, ECCSC, and put us, our group and organization, on the no pay list. So any resources that was given to us due to and based on our work and our efforts, elected officials have taken a personal affront to us and made it their business not to allocate any resources or revenues and services to our organization. And that's openly and purposely even denying us FOIA of them doing so.
So Democrat Governor J.B. Pritzker can go on national television. He can go on Meet the Press or on State of the Union on CNN and talk about how his administration is supporting violence prevention efforts. But here you've heard directly from Tyrone Muhammad, who's boots on the ground in the south and west sides of Chicago, that Democrats are playing politics with funding to reduce violence on our streets, and as a result,
So violence prevention funds, Mark, essentially is used as a tool to put people in order. It's like a campaign fund. So it's like getting violence prevention funds and using the tax dollars in a way that make organizations submit and to stay along the Democratic line. And as long as you're doing that, then you will receive the funding necessary. And this becomes the thing that I always talk about, Mark, when I talk about how Republicans and conservatives are missing the opportunity to tap in and captivate and capture a new voting bloc, a bloc that we either not coming out to vote, or we're going to vote for Trump, or we're going to vote Republican. But that the Republican Party has to be made to understand that with 20 million ex-felons, Mark, please note this number, 20 million ex-cons across America, 80 million just as involved individuals. That means people had to brush with the law, people who've had probation, that's not, they didn't go to prison, but they are considered, they have records, 80 million. That voter block alone is enough for us to hit these swing states and tap into that will bring Donald Trump an astounding victory, and by margins never seen by any president. 80% is what the Democrats need to possibly win this election. Kamala needs to win this election. I'm telling you, the Black men that I see and the Black community members that I see, they don't have 80 million. I mean, 80% of the vote. They don't have 80% of the Black vote. And the way we're pushing the ex-cons for Trump, we're gonna ensure that we deliver several million or more votes to Donald Trump at this upcoming election. But we have to do the work. We got a short time to do it.
Tyrone, one of the key issues in this campaign is public safety regarding the open borders policies of the Democrats, Biden-Harris, and you're seeing this in downtown Chicago. This article that came out in yesterday's New York Post, I think we've done a good job of setting the stage here. It's now been exposed, Tyrone, thanks to this interview and your work, that very dangerous Venezuelan gangs have now infiltrated the streets of Chicago, and probably not just in Chicago, probably in these other Democratic controlled cities like New York and other places. But let's park here in Chicago for a moment. Tell us about this infiltration of these dangerous Venezuelan gangs who are now on the streets of Chicago.
So what happens is, Mark, you know, the dynamic of Chicago is like no other. Where Chicago tends to go politically, a lot of times in terms of street gangs and violence or any culture, the world goes, society goes, right? So with that Chicago is unique in that it has cliques and crews now. It has so many diverse cliques, sets, and crews that it's almost impossible to pinpoint. Because one day you can have a group, the next day you can have another group. There's no real positive, no consistent flow of line of who belongs to what gang and what tribe in Chicago. So now imagine in the Dayton, Chicago streets with Trinidad Vargas, the TDA type gangs that know the language and culture of Spanish. And then they think about the Latin folks and the Latin kings. They are already historically are at war with one another. So from the last time, I know a couple of people who belong to the Latin kings, and they did an extensive recruiting campaign of the migrants that has been flooding our communities, right? And they have integrated them in their street organization. But what happens is, in order to keep up with that, the Latin folks or the Latin disciples and the other brothers have to do the same thing. So now you bring people in cliques and you bring them, the Venezuelans and the migrants, I say terrorists, into the already tenuous and tension-fed groups like that, Latin groups. Now you produce a powder keg. Now you'll have these groups now warring against each other in these communities. But then more than anything else, these groups then integrate into Black communities, taking over apartments, being whether in all these big 6 flats and 8 flats and 30-unit buildings where they all have been given shelter. Now they become these communities and these blocks become their blocks and community. When they showing their flags, that's like when they stand out in front of a building, that's the way of showing their flags to say, this is our building, this is our block, this is our community, we here, and we plan on staying here. And so what we're trying to do on the ground, or are doing on the ground, is to make sure that what the Democrats produce in terms of a public safety issue and potential terrorism in our communities, we're saying we're getting in front of it. So we want to know who in our community, who are these individuals, and to keep the young wolves at bay by not striking or actually committing violent act against these individuals, because we don't know who the enemy is. We don't know why they're here. The disinvestment has increased the tension exponentially. So we stuck on the front line with no resources to even get at this violence, because the police is made to do everything and the police can't do everything, right? They can't be the scapegoats and the fall guys for what the government here produced.
Tyrone, it's shocking that you have street gangs in the city of Chicago actively recruiting young men from Venezuela to join their gangs. You've got existing Venezuelan gangs that are taking over certain territories all on the streets and communities in Chicago. Do you anticipate, Tyrone, at some point, as you said, sort of an explosion, a gang war to the likes of what we've never seen or experienced before? Do you anticipate that potentially happening on the streets of Chicago, this all-out massive gang war between Venezuela gangs and Chicago gangs?
I do. I do expect it to happen eventually. When you have already the tensions from the influx of illegals coming into our communities, taking our resources, um, um, committing acts of violence and crime against the citizens of Chicago. I see the pushback about to happen. It's gonna happen, and it is only getting worse and get worse because the Johnson administration here in Chicago has consistently ignored our cries about what is needed to create progress for our communities. You know, like I know, Mark, for 60 years or more, we have consistently and systematically voted blue no matter who. We have been enslaved by the Democratic Party that hasn't produced relatively nothing. Our communities look worse than they did when Dr. King was president. So I want to know that how is it even possible for us as Black people, Black men, Black women in this country to continue to hold on to something that has given us nothing? That has given us nothing, and we keep voting. It's all about gender politics. They play gender politics and they play color, and we have to begin to understand that it is our own that has violated us that we must push back against. And if we don't do that and take charge of our own communities and then start using our vote as leverage to change the way we vote, the way we see politics as a tool to gain resources for our community, then we will continue to hook, line, and sinker vote for this party, regardless to what it has given us and produced for us. Black Death has been a hustle in Chicago and surrounding and America's cities throughout. We can no longer watch Black Death as a hustle. We can no longer allow people to use diversity, equity, and inclusion to exclude certain populations and of the community. Because if you have 18,000, Mark, homeless ex-cons in Chicago, and you have no housing for them and veterans, how is it that you have housing for terrorists coming from Venezuela to inundate our community with violence and drugs? We give them money to buy drugs and guns, and that they essentially use on us. We have a governor who taunts himself, who runs around talking about public safety and violence. Yet the very groups that stand between violence and the community, he remove or take funding from. That's a lie. You know, like I know, Mark, you was there with me. We secured the CTA trains for a week. And according to the Chicago Transit Authority, and according to the I think then Superintendent Brown, he said while ECCSC was on the trains, on the public transportation, there was no incidents of violence. How is it that we can do the work, but then the resources necessary to continue the work isn't there for us to serve our community?
If you're just joining us, I am Mark Vargas, editor-in-chief of Illinois Review, filling in for Roger Stone here on the StoneZONE, and we're having a fascinating conversation with Tyrone Muhammad, founder of Ex-Cons for Community and Social Change. And we're talking about how the Democratic leaders in Illinois, and I know this is not just in Illinois, it's in these Democratic-controlled cities, sanctuary cities, where funding is not being allocated to the local residents in these communities. The funding is being allocated to these illegals, these migrants that are taking over our towns and communities and cities and city blocks and apartment buildings. And Tyrone's also talking about the fact that these Venezuelan gangs are taking over the streets of Chicago. Tyrone, you hit on this point, and I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, and I've just got a few more questions for you. But I know that there's been nearly $500 million allocated in the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago to go towards the migrants. What about the money going towards the actual residents there in the south and west sides of Chicago? What's happening, Tyrone?
Well, I mean, what's been happening? This is nothing new, Mark. And I want the people listening to understand that we're not asking for anything that we're not doing. We built this country. Black people consistently on the front line working to make America great. Here it is. We are at a loss when we see so many homeless veterans, when we see so many ex-cons who've actually paid their debt to society, who have contributed in this city to reducing violence and as well as removing shooters and killers off these streets. Yet these people are not afforded an opportunity towards the resources and revenue to help make America great. This is a problem. And the communities, we have women without housing and homes in the city, yet Black women are not the first ones housed in homes, right? Then to see this happening while our government and administration, mostly Black, having a really effectuated change in our communities is very disturbing, and there's no reason, there's no wonder why so many people have now turned towards President Trump. And we are asking him and openly asking him to allow us to be used as a tool to help drain the swamps of Illinois and Chicago here. And as we stretch throughout the swing states where ex-cons are that have the right to vote, we want to know that he has a standing army of men and women who believe that Donald Trump can put America back on a course of success, and that President Trump actively and openly has confessed that Black people should be some of the populations that should be cared for first. I've heard him say it. I believe it. It's like, how do you not do for the people who most in need? That's a Christian faith tradition. You do more for the people most in need before you start dealing with people who already have. So I believe Donald Trump can get the communities back on course and back on standard so that we could be a respected community again, and we can actually transform the thinking and mindset of those that's most disinvested to say, hey, man, they have a stake in America. And it's not fair for other people, as Donald Trump said, taking Black jobs. Black people got offended by that, but that is the truth. He can't say it. He might can't say it, but I can say it. I can say Black jobs are being taken. I can say Black men are not being trained. I can say that these unions up here, Democratic-led unions, are training non-citizens, training migrants, illegals, before they train American citizens. The Black man and boy in America seem to only have graveyards and prisons as their lot. And America should be ashamed, and the Democratic Party across America should be ashamed that they play gender politics and race politics when in Chicago alone, Mark, and I'm gonna close, in Chicago alone, we have the most Black elected officials than any major city and state in America. Over 150 Black elected positions across this state, right? Over. And most positions are from the lieutenant governor all the way to the county board president, to the mayor, to the police chief, to the state's attorneys, and to all of these, the state reps, aldermen, and Congress people are Black. Yet our communities look like third world country.
Tyrone, I want to close with this, and I appreciate your time. President Trump signed the First Step Act. That was under his administration, a very historic accomplishment that sent thousands of nonviolent first-time offenders, particularly from the Black and brown communities, sent them home as part of the reversing the racist policies put in place by the 1994 crime bill that was written by Joe Biden as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, a bill that he bragged about that accelerated mass incarceration for Black and brown Americans. And then it was signed into law by President Bill Clinton there in 1994. Tyrone, my last question to you is, talk about the impacts, because President Trump didn't get a whole lot of credit for that. In fact, when he signed that historic legislation, all the press wanted to talk about was the Russia hoax, the Robert Mueller investigation that turned out to be a complete fraud. But you've got boots on the ground in Chicago. What kind of impact has the First Step Back made on families in the community, particularly here in Chicago, and from your experience?
Mark, I need you to please, some type of way, let President Trump know that we thank him. The brothers on the street in the communities, they thank him. They've been able to come back home to their communities for simple things as a drug possession. They was given 3 strikes and they was out. They was out of the communities and they became fuel for the prison industrial complex. President Trump First Step Act reversed the narrative of Clinton 94 crime bill that ushered mass incarceration across the country to our communities, ushered in mass incarceration. And these men and boys that Trump released are also men and boys who doing public safety measures, who are part of the educational process of at-risk youth, who work in the prisons, who take on a lot of the responsibility of reducing crime in the cities. Those are men who Trump released that has influence in these communities. But what I need President Trump to understand is that with a standing army like that, because they clearly can't protect you, we will be marching. We will be marching these men. We have a press conference, Mark, Wednesday at 4:00 at Trump Towers outside. And then we have a gathering at the Rebar. Well, we will be setting up to march for ex-cons for Trump will march to Mar-a-Lago to say to the president that we with him, we support him, give us instruction, and he has a standing army of men who he has helped, who he has released from prison, who are out here doing great works, and he's a testament of what giving a second chance look like in the flesh. Here I am as an ex-felon who take my job very serious and promoting and highlighting the great works of ex-cons. It's like we are ex of everything negative. We are no longer involved with the negative that has caused terroristic effects on our community. And we hope that President Trump, and we really hope that our government in general will see a better way to utilize the talent and the expertise. And we are the experts, subject experts, in all of these things that we say is violence to push back at any ills that have caused damage that has reduced America to in some of these communities to third world looking cities. And we hope that we will be given the opportunity and a chance to help. And I think like I said, we only have a few weeks, Mark, and we're ready to go to work and getting this vote out. But we need his help, and we need the conservatives' help, even in Illinois, to further do this work. And we can't do it by ourselves.
Thank you. That was Tyrone Muhammad, founder of Ex-Cons for Community and Social Change in Chicago, and also for the Ex-Cons for Trump movement. Tyrone Muhammad, thank you for joining us. Hope to have you back on the Stone Zone here again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for having me. Talk to you soon.
What an incredible interview with Tyrone Muhammad, who really is exposing the realities of what's happening in Chicago. You see, the Democratic politicians like J.B. Pritzker wanted everyone to see the Democratic National Convention, Chicago, where they shipped the homeless and the migrants out of the city, where they washed and scrubbed the sidewalks. They wanted to put on their best face to try and trick people into thinking that this is the real Chicago. But that's simply just smoke and mirrors, and it's yet another cover-up in the recent history of the Democratic Party. And what you're seeing on the ground here in parts of the south and west sides of downtown Chicago is migrants taking over communities, taking over community centers, taking over apartment buildings. You're seeing migrants being prioritized over single moms with kids who are domestic abuse victims. You're seeing these migrants take precedent over veterans who were honorably discharged from the U.S. Armed Forces, who served our country honorably, many of them in war. They've now taken a back seat. They're now being pushed to the back of the line because the migrants have taken priority. They're given food, they're given shelter, they're staying in hotels all across the city. They're being prioritized when an apartment or a home opens up. Instead of that home or apartment going towards a resident of the south and west side of Chicago who was formerly homeless, those homes are now being provided to the illegals and their families instead. It is outrageous. And as a result, we're seeing crime skyrocketing in the streets, particularly here in Chicago. I've seen reports from nonprofit organizations that say that in Chicago alone, there's been an 11,000% increase in arrests of Venezuelans. 11,000% increase. At the exact same time, the Chicago Police Department is struggling to retain officers. We have the city of Chicago has close to a 2,000 police officer shortage. Why? Many of these officers have either retired, relocated to another department in Illinois, or relocated to a department outside of the state. And as a result, we have a 2,000 police officer shortage. That is why in the year 2023, over 220,000 high priority 911 calls went unanswered in the city of Chicago. Why? Because there's a police officer shortage. At the same time as we've heard from Tyrone Muhammad's interview, at the same time that we have a police shortage, at the same time that you can't even get a police officer to show up to a 911 call, a high priority 911 call. Calls like shots fired, assault in progress. At the exact same time that this is happening, you have very violent and vicious and dangerous Venezuelan street gangs taking over the cities, taking over the streets in Chicago. They're taking over entire blocks. They're taking over apartment complexes and housing units. And Tyrone is right. At some point, there's going to be a war, a very violent war that's going to break out between the residents and the local gangs in Chicago and these Venezuelan gangs. And innocent lives are going to be taken. It is a shame. This is what's happening in Chicago, for example, is just a mini version of what's going to happen across our entire country under a Harris-Walz regime. And at the same time, you have Democratic leaders like Illinois Governor Pritzker, who is not allocating resources to violence prevention organizations like Ex Cons for Community and Social Change. He's only giving the money to those local organizations that will kiss his ring, organizations that may not necessarily have the best interests of people at heart, or organizations that really aren't working to make our streets safer, like what Ex Cons for Community and Social Change are doing day in and day out to make communities safer. And so we'll have more on that as these stories continue to develop. But I also want to talk about a story that continues as the theme here, as well as cover-up. They're not only covering up, Joe Biden's health, they're also covering up what the city of Chicago looks like in terms of crime and these violent Venezuelan gangs taking over. They're also covering up what's happening in terms of the real support that's out there for President Donald Trump. And just last week, as you've heard, the Teamsters president, Sean O'Brien, put out a poll to all of their millions of members about who do they support in the upcoming presidential election. And overwhelmingly, to their shock, their members support President Trump over Kamala Harris. These numbers are unbelievable. 59.6% in a member poll support President Trump, over 34% for Kamala Harris. In a similar phone poll that went out to their millions of members, 58% support President Trump, over 31% that support Kamala Harris. It was no contest. So what happened after the Teamsters president shared that he was going to be polling his members and then releasing the results of that poll? What happened? The Teamsters executive board decides for the very first time in 30 years that they are going to remain neutral in this upcoming presidential election. It is shocking that despite an overwhelming majority of support for President Trump over Vice President Kamala Harris, the Teamsters decide to remain neutral for the first time in 30 years. We should be shocked, but we're not. But that didn't stop a local Teamsters Council, Council 25, which represents Teamsters not only in Illinois, but in Northwest Indiana. That didn't stop them from coming out and making an endorsement. And who did this local Teamsters Council endorse? Kamala Harris. Again, against the will of their own members. Again, these numbers don't lie. And to see that kind of support for President Trump amongst a union, a big, powerful, traditionally Democratic union like the Teamsters, to see these numbers come out and the overwhelming majority of support that President Trump has among those hardworking, working-class Americans should cause great concern to the Democrats and to the Harris campaign. But does the mainstream media, do they want to cover that? No, because they're too busy protecting Kamala Harris. This is, ladies and gentlemen, why President Trump has completely transformed and realigned politics in America. The Democratic Party is no longer the party of the working class. The Democratic Party is no longer the party for the working person or for the little guy. That is now the party of President Trump. That is now the Make America Great Again movement. The Democratic Party has proven, particularly in how they hijacked a presidency from Joe Biden, yanked him out of the primary after 14 million Democratic primary voters voted as Joe Biden to be their Democratic nominee for president, despite 14 million, many of them working class. Instead, they yank him out because why? Because George Clooney said so. They yanked Joe Biden out. Why? Because Barack Obama said so. Nancy Pelosi said so. Proving that the Democratic Party is now the party of Wall Street financiers and Silicon Valley billionaires and Hollywood actors who live in a world of make-believe. That is the new Democratic Party in America, and the party of the working class. The party that says no tax on tips. The party that says no tax on overtime. The party that supports close allies like Israel. The party that supports law and order. The party that is for making communities safer. The party that's for lifting up Americans, particularly Americans in the communities like in the south and west sides of Chicago, and not just in Chicago, but in Milwaukee and in Detroit and in Philadelphia and in Atlanta. And instead of a message of keeping them down, lifting them up, that a rising tide lifts all boats, creating job opportunities, job training opportunities, trade school opportunities, messaging of that our best days are still ahead, America first, citizens first. This is the new Republican Party under President Donald Trump, and it is why that the Democrat elites in Washington, it is why the people that run the Justice Department and the FBI, the establishment, the swamp, it is why they are so against President Trump and the Make America Great Again movement, because it challenges their authority. It challenges their power. That power is power to the people, not to the establishment. Power to everyday working people, not to the elites that sit in golden corridors and within the halls of power in Washington, within the halls of power of the Justice Department and the FBI. We, the people, they're afraid of that. And that is why this is no accident that for the last several years, Democratic Party leaders, again, including Vice President Harris and President Biden and Speaker Pelosi and so many Democratic members of Congress, day after day, week after week, month after month, this drumbeat that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. The MAGA movement is a threat to democracy. And as I said earlier in the show, you have one member of Congress that's actually calling for the president to be shot. Where's the Secret Service knocking on their door? Because of this constant drumbeat, President Trump, and because he's for the people, his life is in grave danger. And that is why in just the last couple of months, he's had not one, but two assassination attempts. They couldn't get President Trump through impeachments. They couldn't get President Trump through fake investigations like the Mueller witch hunt. They couldn't get President Trump over a perfect phone call with the president of Ukraine. All of this has resulted in now they want to take him out permanently. His life is in grave danger. And I ask all of us to continue to pray for President Trump, to pray for his safety, to pray for the safety of his family, because we're in real dangerous times. This election is not about policies. You know, every year people talk about this is the most important election in our history. This is the most important election. I think more important than the election around the Civil War, because this is not a battle of ideas. This is not a battle of policies. This is a battle of good versus evil. And you cannot deny the divine favor and the divine protection that President Trump has had in these two assassination attempts. So I want you to join all of us in keeping President Donald Trump and his family in your prayers. Well, that wraps up today's show. Thanks for tuning in. Roger Stone will be back for the next show. But until then, I'm Mark Vargas. Thank you for watching the Stone Zone. Have a great night, and God bless America.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?